Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Our CEO, Bob Chapman, recently published a post on LinkedIn titled Ending the Poverty of Dignity. Here's Bob to give his thoughts on that topic.
I want to share with you kind of what my current thinking is in terms of kind of where we are in our journey from kind of transforming from management to leadership, from focusing our business to focusing on the people we had the span of care, and kind of tie it into what kind of is going on in our country. Initially, as most of you know, this was kind of a internal revelation for me to awaken me to a profound sense of responsibility for the people in my span of care. And I've been speaking for the last 10 years as I've gotten out into the military, into government, into healthcare, into business, and the nonprofit about the pain I see in the world where people feel used, they don't feel cared for. So prior to COVID-19, prior to the social unrest, prior to the heightened activity in the political environment, my message was the crisis of leadership malpractice, that we weren't creating in this country, in this world, leaders who had the skills and the courage to care for the people they had the privilege of leading. So I've been on message now for a good 10 years about this issue, and the audiences around the world have reacted strongly. But what's interesting, if you stand back from the combination of, so we had a strong kind of global economy, then we had COVID-19, then we had social unrest, and then we now had the political discourse. If you put all those pieces together, and now all of this demonstrations, concern for inclusion and diversity, and you kind of stand back and look at all these pieces. About 2 weeks ago, this kind of came to a head when a gentleman named Bill Urey, Professor Bill Urey of Harvard, who negotiates world peace. He started their School of Negotiation. He's a profound world peace negotiator. Called me because of the friendship we've had over the last 10 years since he experienced our culture. And he said, Bob, how do you feel? I'm concerned about kind of the combination of all these events and what's going on in the country. And I want to do something, but I just wanted to kind of get some thoughts before I did anything. And so we talked, and I talked about what we're seeing is, what we've been talking about, is we're seeing a lot of hurt. People have good jobs, they're making good money, but they don't feel valued. And the reason they don't feel valued is they don't feel heard, because people talk to each other, but they don't know how to listen to each other so we can understand the different perspectives and work out our differences and be more united by purpose and less divided by issues, okay? So Bill and I had this he's a phenomenal individual, and we had this conversation, and the next morning he sends me an email that Tom Friedman wrote in the New York Times, an article called, in effect, the poverty of dignity. And he took the highlights of that article and sent them to me, and it was stated in beautiful words by Tom Friedman. It was exactly our message, but stated in beautiful terms. He said, we don't have a poverty of wealth, of money. We have a poverty of dignity, okay? He said, you can give people jobs, you can give people decent salary, you can give them benefits, but if you humiliate them, which means not valuing them, if they don't feel heard, you will see a reaction like no other reaction you will see. And this comes from, this is affirmed by Bill in terms of peace negotiations. So what we saw there was this kind of eclectic journey of this accountant to truly human leadership. And Tom Friedman, with his eloquence, to me, captured it in a way we can all understand. What we're suffering in this world right now, what explains the behavior we're seeing in cities, in families, in our communities is a poverty of dignity. Money does not create dignity. It creates economic wealth, but not human wealth. And then Tom Friedman comes right again to where we are, and he said, we need to learn to listen to each other. We need deep listening. Deep listening we call empathetic listening, which means I understand you now. I'm not debating with you that you're wrong and I'm right. I understand how you see the issues of immigration or other issues, and now I can understand you. So what was beautiful is that Tom connected this poverty of dignity to the need for listening. In my communication, when I teach MBA students, when I speak around the world, I said the most powerful thing we have learned is that we are not creating, our education system is not creating leaders in this world. We're creating technical skills, accounting, finance, math, chemistry, whatever. So we give people technical skills, but we don't give them human skills. So what we don't know how to do is we don't know how to care for each other. We teach people to use each other for our success. So this culmination of events, COVID-19, strong economy, social unrest, political climate, underneath all of this superficial and very evident unrest we have in this country, we have a poverty of dignity that we don't need to change governments, we don't need to change philosophies, we need to teach people how to care. And to do that, we need to teach them to listen with empathy, which totally aligns with solving the poverty of dignity. Because money does not solve that, but the skill of listening, which provides caring, solves the poverty of dignity, and we can do that tomorrow. Cynthia and I have been on this journey with our nonprofit. Barry-Wehmiller University has been teaching this. It is the most powerful class which teaches people how to care for each other. That is the world, I imagine, where people genuinely care for each other. And therefore, we live together in harmony. We work out our differences because we understand each other, and we treat each other with respect and dignity. So this journey towards solving the poverty of dignity is the biggest crisis, the biggest opportunity we have to live and work together as we are intended to, where we genuinely feel cared for and therefore care for others.
As we talk about this poverty of dignity and flesh out the connection between leadership and dignity, we want to bring to you a conversation that Mary Rudder and myself had with Donna Hicks, a conflict resolution specialist who has facilitated diplomatic efforts in the Middle East and other high conflict regions. She's an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. She's written 2 books about this subject, Dignity and Leading with Dignity. And we start off by asking Donna a simple question. What is dignity?
One of the things that I learned working with people about this concept of dignity is that, people have a kind of a good feeling about it. It's a good thing. But then I say to them, okay, well, tell me, what do you think it is? And they say, oh, well, you just want to be treated well. And I said, well, what would that look like in a daily basis in a concrete way? And, people just have a very hard time coming up with very, specific ideas about what it is. And I'll tell you, the other thing that happens 100% of the time is that people say that it's respect, dignity and respect, as if it were just one word. And, what I've learned over the years working on these international conflicts, which is where I discovered this whole concept of dignity, what I've learned is that, people will say, we demand respect. We demand respect. And, the only way we're going to end this conflict is if we're respected. Well, I think it's a bridge too far, because dignity is really what they need to be demanding, to be treated as if they're a human being, because my simple definition is that every human being is born with dignity, which means that they were born with value and worth. That's as simple as that. Every human being, when he or she enters the universe, this wonderful planet, they are born with dignity. And the other part of that definition, though, that most people haven't really thought about either, is that even though we're born with inherent value and worth, we're also born vulnerable to having that dignity violated and to be, have our sense of value and worth diminished and devalued. So again, dignity is something that all of us have. We were just born with it. We don't have to do anything to have dignity. But respect, I believe, has to be earned. We do have to do something if we say we respect people. So you see, that's a huge distinction, because dignity should be a baseline for the way we treat one another. Because we're all valuable, every last one of us. And so the confusion around dignity and respect always makes people just stop and say, well, how am I supposed to, treat somebody with dignity if they're treating me badly? So it goes like that, Brent.
Yeah, it's that intersection, I think, to where where Bob says that everybody is someone's precious child. And I think that's kind of...
I know, I love that.
That might have been it's actually kind of the starting seed for him moving to think about what we're trying to do in the workplace in terms of dignity. It's interesting.
Well, let me say, can I just comment on that? Because when I give a PowerPoint presentation, if I'm giving a keynote, and one of the first things I address is what is dignity, and I share my basic definition that it's our inherent value and vulnerability. The next slide I show always is a little infant baby. And I say, now look at this little infant baby. If you have any doubt that we're born with inherent value and worth, just take a look at this child. Would we ever say that this little baby is, has no worth, has no value? And then I go on to say, of course we wouldn't say that, because we would say that the baby is invaluable. It's priceless and irreplaceable. And so what do we do with something that's invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable? We take care of it. We protect it. We love it. We nurture it. We treat it as if it's some treasure. So, it's just that whole notion. You're so right about this is where Bob and I have intersected very powerfully, because I think that what we need to do as adults is get back to that, that inherent sense that these little precious kids, when they come into our worlds, they're so adorable. We love them so much. We have to just remember that we had those feelings early on, and to really ask ourselves, how did we lose sight of that when they grow up? What happened that we lost that connection to their preciousness?
Let's take a step back for a second, because there's something that you said there that I thought that we should probably follow up on is how this all began for you. Like, how did this become a passion of yours? How did this become something that you decided was worth writing about and exploring and trying to educate other people about?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story, actually, because it's nothing that I planned on. It's nothing that I set my sights that I was going to uncover this in my career as an international conflict resolution specialist. I have been doing dialogue work. We're bringing parties together with parties in the hardest intractable conflicts all over the world. We've worked in Israel, Palestine, and in all the conflicts in South America with Colombia and in Sri Lanka. Anyway, wherever there was a really hot conflict, my organization at Harvard would be asked to go in and try to facilitate dialogues with the parties. And I would be sitting at these tables trying to follow the negotiations, because what they were arguing about, of course, were the political issues that divided them. And I'm sitting there, I'm a psychologist, I'm a trained psychologist, and I'm sitting there noticing that there are obvious ways for these parties to come to an agreement here. And they even were able to reach that sort of place where they understood that, this agreement could really work. It's in our interest. But what happened was they would get enraged about something, or something would blow up, and I started thinking, wait a minute, what is fueling all of that? They clearly found a way to resolve this conflict, but they just couldn't sign on. And what I came to learn, and it was, in my understanding, a missing link in understanding what creates conflict, and that is that there was this deeply, profoundly emotional underpinning, and this sort of subterranean conversation that was taking place at those tables. But this conversation had no words. It was all about resentment and anger, and it filled the room, Brent. The energy of this emotional layer you couldn't keep it out of the room. And so I thought one day, geez, we've got to have a conversation about that emotional explosion that just happened. And so one day I said, look, something just happened here. We really need to talk about it. There was a big emotional reaction. Could we please just push the pause button on the politics and talk about that? Well, they hated that question. They thought, what do you mean this is about emotional, injuries? This is not about trauma. This isn't about emotions. This is about injustice and politics. And once we get that figured out, we'll be fine. Oh, yeah, right. Well, that didn't work so well. So long story short, one day I was sitting, I think it was in Sri Lanka, and sitting at one of these tables, and I just had an epiphany about what that content of that nonverbal conversation was about. And, it struck me like a bolt of lightning that this was about their dignity. This was about being treated as if they were not even human beings, as if they, didn't matter. Yet, they were trying to resolve the politics with those enormous feelings of having been so violated in their dignity. And so, we're coming near the end of the story, because when I was asked to do a talk in a dialogue facilitation in South America with these two parties, and I said to them, you know what, I'm going to try out this dignity word. I said to myself, I'm going to try out this dignity framing of what is getting in the way of being able to resolve these conflicts. And I just said to the group, again, I wouldn't say we've got to dig deep and find the emotional underpinnings. They hate that word emotion. So then I thought, I'm going to try out this word dignity. And I said to these guys, I said, look, my experience facilitating conversations all over the world has told me that there's always an underlying issue that rarely gets explored, but it's at the heart of not being able to find peace together. And I said, this word, I said to them, I found a word that I think is going to help you think about whether I'm right about this underlying, deeper issue. And I said, would you all be willing to talk about a time when you felt your dignity was violated by this conflict? And everybody just stopped what they were doing and just stared at me and said, dignity? I said, yeah, I think this is what's happening here. I think you both are experiencing assaults to your dignity, and this is just outrage. This is creating an outrage here. And so they all looked at me, and I said, would you be willing to do this? And every single person agreed, Brent. Every person said, yeah, we'll talk about dignity, because, there's something about that word that's magical, because it tends to validate people's experiences. If you say to them, oh, you're so traumatized or you're so emotionally wounded, they hate that. As I said, they didn't want to be thinking of themselves as weak and traumatized and wounded. But I said, if you've had your dignity violated, of course you're going to be upset. Of course you're going to feel resentment. Of course you're going to feel like this is the greatest injustice. So that's how I came upon that word. It was really like one of those flashes of enlightenment. I don't know where it came from, But ever since then, I've been using that word to describe this underlying human, what I call the human dimension to these conflicts that never, rarely, if ever, got discussed at these negotiating tables. So I wrote a book about it. My first book was the role dignity plays, the essential role it plays in resolving conflict. And that book went out. I figured, this book would be great for my community, for my international conflict resolution people. But it got, people found it in the corporate world, in education and faith communities, and I got barraged with requests for consultations because people, you know what, I mean, you know this, people who haven't been treated well, the sort of toxic environment that creates, especially in a workplace, brings everybody down, Brent. And so they thought, okay, well, let's see what Donna thinks about the corporate world. Does this fit with the corporate environment? And lo and behold, as you well know, not by your example. I mean, your organization and Bob, you do the opposite. That's why I wrote about Bob in my book, saying he is definitely a dignity leader. He understands this to the core. But there's so few people out there like Bob, Brent. There's very few people. And I know we're all trying to reach them because there's such a better way of organizing people and a better way of treating people. And once they learn it, once they figure it out, and I'm sure, Bob would say the same thing, once we give them a taste of what this is like, it's like, oh my gosh, why hadn't I thought of this before, So that's that long story.
So Donna, something you said, there are so few people out there that are able to lead with dignity. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I think it's ignorance. What I have found, Mary, is that when I go into an organization, they've, hired me to try to figure out how to create a culture of dignity and how to lead with dignity. They just haven't explored it. It's not anything you learn in school. You don't learn it in grade school. You don't learn it in middle school. You don't learn it in high school. And certainly you don't, I teach it now in colleges, but the problem is it's just not been a part of our curricula. And I think our educational system is ripe for learning about this. And I'm doing lots of work with great teachers, so now it's not so much of an issue, but this should be a part of public education, and you certainly don't learn it in professional schools. There's not a Dignity 101 course that I've ever heard in a professional school. Now, that said, a lot of my colleagues, I work a lot with some business ethicists, and they are creating coursework for business schools. So that's a really good, advancement. But it's just, Mary, it just was never, nobody ever really thought to teach this stuff. I don't know. It's more ignorance because people who don't know it, Mary, I'm finding they're really good people. It's not like we're talking about a bunch of bad leaders. They just haven't been exposed and haven't been educated. And so this is why, with all of us teaming up to try to, scale up this knowledge that we both, your organization and my work has, hopefully we can scale it up so we can get it out there so it's everyday parlance. It's not just for the precious few who either, do a study group with you or a workshop with your organization, or somebody like hires me to train them. I get requests about this all the time, but it should be scaled up. And this is why I think it's so important for all of us to try to put our heads together. It's why I'm doing this today. It's why, Mary, our conversations that we've had have been so important to me, because we need the world to get this information, because we can do so much better than what we've done. Look at our world right now. We can do way better than this.
Do you think that somewhere along the line we lost our sense of what dignity was? Or do you think it's just been kind of naturally gets ignored through the course of human existence as we become concerned with ourselves and less concerned with others?
Well, the problem, I think, is that we just haven't evolved that level of consciousness about how we should be together. I think this kind of consciousness really does have a process, and partly we have to learn about it, but the other part of it is that we have to experience it. And somebody just recently, I sort of joked with Bob and said, we have to write a book called Parenting with Dignity, because I think every parent should have taken a course in how to treat people well, and what it looks like to honor people's dignity, and how people react, because it's just, again, as I said before, the ignorance surrounding this concept is just, as my colleague would say, it's encyclopedic, this ignorance. And so, and the other thing is, because we haven't really understood this, Brent, that a lot of us have been traumatized in our young lives. We either, let's say we have parents who just didn't know and, neglected the development and nurturing of our dignity, or we've had school teachers who have, unknowingly violated kids' dignity, or we have siblings who have, hurt us, or we have fellow peers who have, there's nothing worse than having a group of, adolescents and having them, experience being dismissed or not included. And so these dignity violations are rampant everywhere at every point in our lives. And again, we're not talking about bad parents or bad people. We're talking about people who just haven't had the opportunity to actually integrate this into how they are in the world. And so many of us have had so many chronic violations of our dignity that the other thing I found, Brent, in my research is that the people who are the worst dignity violators have had the worst violations in their young lives. So, there's a pattern here that gets reproduced. And unless we stop this through education, honestly, I'm on a mission about education, because we just have to address this, and it's global. It's not just here in this country. It's a global ignorance, and try to help evolve that consciousness that, we really do have to treat each other with dignity, because when we don't, we suffer. Even the people who commit dignity violations suffer. But when we do treat others with dignity, this is when we as human beings flourish. So that's such a simple idea, but in order to get to that point where we're all flourishing, everybody has to be on the same page about this. Everybody has to know this.
This seems to me to fall into that category of says easy, does hard. It sounds great to understand it, but how do you make it come to life? So what does your book say, and what do you say about how to make it come to life? How do you lead with dignity?
Well, so there are basic pieces of knowledge. My dignity model has like 4 or 5 basic principles. I have my research that I've done has shown that there are, I interviewed people all over the world about dignity, and I came up with 10 ways to honor dignity, which is consistent. It's consistent with people's experiences all over. I thought I'd probably find cultural differences, but the fact is, it's not true. What I have found is different in, let's say, Asia compared to Africa or North America, South America, is the context in which these dignity violations occur, but the feeling of being assaulted or having your dignity violated is the same. And so to me, it's a human experience. I literally, when I go into an organization, if they want to create a culture of dignity, the first order of business is learning about all these things, like what I was just saying, the 10 elements of dignity. There's 10 ways that we violate our own dignity. And so these building blocks, what I call, of the dignity model, you have to know this. And so it's like, we spend years learning about technical things, especially in the business world. You know, we learn how to create business plans and how to maximize shareholder profit and all of this stuff. But when do we learn how to treat our people so that not only will they flourish, but our company flourishes along with it? So this stuff, it just literally has to be part of our education. And it's amazing, Mary, my experience going into these organizations is that people, once they learn this, they say to me, oh my gosh, Donna, this is just common sense. And I turn to them and I say, yes, you're right, it is common sense, but it's not common knowledge. And
or common
so,
practice.
But once they, or practice, exactly, Mary. And so once they figure it out, and, you know, I spend so much time going through different, exercises, how they learn how to defend their dignity, how they learn how to give feedback to someone who might have violated their dignity, you know, how to give people a sense of understanding what's happening inside them, you know, what's really happening inside our brains when somebody violates our dignity. I mean, the fact is, and this is really a phenomenal finding in this neuroscience research that I found, that when people experience a dignity violation, it shows up in the brain in the same place as a physical injury. So what that means is that the brain doesn't really know the difference. Because don't we know? Think about the last time somebody's violated your dignity. It's a crushing feeling. You know, it's just like so. It sort of stops us dead in our tracks. We either freeze or some of us get really angry and we want to lash back. Now, this is a real phenomenon. This isn't something, some touchy-feely, we all have to be nice to one another. No, this has a physical manifestation inside us when we experience these violations. Now, the opposite, Mary, is also true, which is when we have our dignity honored, when we are treated fairly, when we do feel like that we're being understood, we're getting recognition, that our identity is accepted, all these are part of the 10 elements, then we feel great. You know, we have that an opposite reaction in our bodies. So this isn't just about being nice. It's about how do we bring out the best in people and how can we help them along in their own development, in their own, not just professional development, that happens too, but in their development of their consciousness about how to be together in the world and how to be in relationships. Because at the end of the day, it's about relationships, how we connect with other people. And helping people figure that out, oh my gosh, it changes their lives in a short order. Because as I was saying, this is not rocket science here. People really do feel like it's common sense, but it's so it's so obvious once you know it, but it's not obvious if you don't know it. So it's just it's just remarkable to see the transformation. But it is about advancing our consciousness, Mary.
So do you have any examples or stories of businesses that you've gone into to help them become a dignity-honoring organization?
I just get so excited when I see that recognition, that inner recognition of, when people realize that for all their lives, they fail to embrace their own dignity. I mean, I remember going into this one company and this one wonderful woman who was the staff assistant to the director of the NGO, a non-governmental organization that I was hired to help them with their dignity issues. She, when I explained that, as I said to you, that we're all born with dignity, and it's not something you have to do in order to get dignity. It's just in your DNA. It's in your blood. And she looked at me and she just wept. She came over to me, and this is in the days when we could actually get together to do these kinds of workshops.
Right.
Pre-COVID days. And everybody in the room, because we had the whole organization doing this training, and everybody in the room realized that they might have violated her dignity in the process of, because she was a staff assistant, and she felt like it was okay. She felt all along that, this is just part of my job. They're very big, important people, and I'm just a staff assistant here. And I said, what do you mean, just a staff assistant? No way. I said, this company wouldn't be able to function without you. And anyway, so she had her dignity liberated at that moment, Mary. She was feeling so seen. She was feeling acknowledged. She was feeling recognized for her contribution. And the entire group, the entire team, actually gave her that kind of acknowledgement and apologized to her if they'd ever really, violated her dignity, and made her feel like she was less than. It was astonishing how this opened up this possibility for them to actually connect with their dignity, not connect with any false notions of who's more important and who, because at the end of the day, I always say we may differ in status, but we're all equal in dignity. And that's when there was this major transformative moment in that group, and everybody saw it. And she's like the heroine of the organization now. Everybody just is so grateful to her. But if she didn't have that, if she didn't make herself vulnerable like that, Mary, because vulnerability, as I said, it's really part of this, and described the way that she had been feeling and the way some people had treated her, that whole thing wouldn't have broken open. And it broke open, like everybody's heart broke open there. And I'm assuming that's the kind of example you were looking for.
Yeah. I mean, are some people, do their personalities allow them to be people that are more likely to have their dignity harmed?
Well, I think, as I told you earlier, that when you've come from a family that isn't a dignity conscious, family, and they, violate like this woman also, she told me later that she grew up in a family where she experienced a lot of trauma in her family. And so if you have people who are vulnerable to begin with because they've had so many dignity violations, it's easy for them to just assume that they're worthless, and that they deserve this kind of treatment. So the first order of business that I do when I go into an organization is to find out, where people are in the acceptance and recognition of their own dignity. Because I'll tell you, there's been a lot of hurt out there in the world, and unhealed hurt. And that's the other thing about this dignity model, that it does heal. And, that example that I just gave you was, I think, a perfect illustration of like the group healing around it. It wasn't just this woman, but the whole group engaged in a healing process. And the relationships transformed from that moment on. And this organization actually pledged to, they all wrote up a pledge, what I call a dignity pledge, because that was one of the things that I insisted they do, that this was the way they were going to aspire to treat one another in their work environment. And if they didn't, then they would have a process that they would have to go through where they apologized to the person if somebody violated someone's dignity. And so it's very, very powerful when you get somebody like this woman who is willing to make herself vulnerable. But, of course, Mary, not everybody is that willing to be vulnerable. But I do find that when I do this group work, and usually it is group work, there are always one or two people who are willing to put themselves forward like that and to describe what their experiences have been.
Bob tells a story about a person in one of our plants who had been part of this project, and Bob asked him to report back on it. And he asked him how this project had made him feel. It was a project where he was intimately involved. It was he was making suggestions to make things better. And Bob asked him how it made him feel. And his response to Bob was that he was talking to his wife more. And
yeah, Bob told me this one. That's a great one.
And that story really illustrates what you're talking about on a grander scale, because this guy didn't feel good. He told Bob he didn't feel good about himself. He didn't feel valued. Yeah. He didn't value his family, and that deteriorated. And then finally, when he started regaining that self-worth, that dignity, as it were, it improved the relationships at home. And I think that just shows like the range of what you're talking about and how important it is, and how it just reaches into our society so broadly.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, one of the, why I say that getting people to take responsibility for their own dignity is the first step, because without that, without knowing that you are valuable and you have worth no matter what, even if you mess up, you still have dignity, claiming that. And then as an added bonus on top of that, if you've got a boss who treats you that way in the workplace, if you have someone who demonstrates value and shows you that you are such an important play such an important role here for us, like what Bob does with his people. If you have someone who treats you that way, it's just reinforcement, right? It's reinforcement. The problem is, out there, we haven't had a whole lot of people who know about this. I mean, and so, as I said over and over again, once you start, I say, once you're aware of this stuff, then you become responsible, not only for your own dignity, but you have to treat others the same way. Because if you've got dignity, so does everybody else. That's just the hallmark of being a human being. That's it. We all have it. So, I just think the time has come for this, Mary and Brent. I think we've seen the opposite for far too long. And then all of a sudden along comes somebody like Bob and your group, and who's committed to this, who has his own personal epiphany about somebody's loving sweet child. And I just think that as the evolution of the human species, the consciousness of the human species has its own trajectory, and I think we are at the ripest moment now, right now, and especially given all the turmoil that our country is going through, all the indignities that we've suffered here at the political level. I just believe that it's a way of saying to us, enough. We can't do this anymore. We have to learn how to treat each other as if we were something of value, because it's true. I mean, we have a legal system that protects us from killing people. Why do we do that? Because every human being is valuable. That's why it's not legal to harm others physically. We just have to get a grasp on this psychological harm, this dignity assaults and dignity violations. We have to take that as seriously as if somebody, goes around physically hurting people. Because as I told you a minute ago, that research shows unequivocally that the brain experiences a dignity violation with the same kind of pain as if you had a physical wound, an injury. So that, to me, was what I needed to take this on the road, so that we can contribute to the evolution of our human consciousness. We're getting there. Everything that I think has happened up to this point is making us more ready for a better way, because people are just suffering too much. Mm-hmm. People are just suffering, and we need a better way. And I think that your approach, Bob Chapman's approach, and all of you who are working so tirelessly with him, and what I'm trying to do, and others, I mean, there's a lot of really wonderful people out there trying to do this work like we are. And I can tell you, there's a movement and there's a momentum around this. And it's not just here in this country. I've got dignity agents all over the world working on this. And so we can make this happen. We just have to be unrelenting with our commitment to it.
it's clear, Donna, to me, and I think to most people, that it's the right thing to do. But as we all know, sometimes that's not enough to motivate people at times. Have you been able to draw some corollaries between, creating cultures of dignity and business performance?
Oh yeah. That's most exciting part. That's the most fun part. When I do a keynote, I share the research that my colleagues. I think I told you about Michael Pearson, Mary, at the Humanistic Management Network. Well, he and his colleague. This is a guy, Michael Pearson, who started this network of business ethicists and business professors around the world that have committed themselves to creating a new business paradigm. And they got together after the collapse of 2008, when everything, all the banks went bust and everything. And they said, well, there's a better way of doing this. It's not right that only the 1% got away with not losing everything, and all the rest of the human beings on the planet lost their 401ks, they lost their retirement. And so they just were so fed up that they said there's a better way. And they started a whole program where they created a new paradigm where human dignity, the protection of human dignity, was at the core of this new business paradigm, not shareholder value and maximization or anything like that. It's about treating people, creating cultures within workplaces where people were treated well. So the research that came out of this whole, this caught on like wildfire all over the world. And the research that came out of it showed that when people feel like their dignity is honored in the workplace, several things happen. Number one, they're more productive. Number two, they are willing to give of discretionary energy. Number three, they feel more loyal. They feel like they want to stay with their job. One of the biggest problems in business is where they have to, people come and go because they don't like the toxic work environment. But if the work environment feels great and it's honoring of their dignity, they stay. And, dependability increases, trust increases, which is, to my way of thinking, it's the sine qua non of a good leader, is a leader who is trusted. And finally, they show that profits increase. But they really want to emphasize all these other things before they say profits, because they want to show that this is part of an expanded consciousness here about how leaders act in what kinds of things they need in their repertoire in order to create this kind of environment where people can flourish. Because again, the other part of the findings of their research is that not only do the people flourish, but the companies flourish as well. So, they have lots and lots of research. Michael has written a couple of books about this. You can find it easily. So it's, to me, it's a no-brainer for people in leadership positions to figure this out because it works. It's just one of those simple truths. People flourish when they're treated well. So what else can I say, Mary? That's it.
Yeah, for sure. That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line.
The new bottom line.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the highest line, because I always say to my conflict resolution people, because one of the basic principles in conflict resolution is that you have to find common ground in order to resolve the conflict. And I say, we don't have to find common ground. We have to find higher ground. And once we find this higher ground, we can elevate the conversation, elevate the quality of our relationships. We can elevate just how we decide to be together in the world. So I think that this stuff really does increase. It really takes us to our highest common denominator as people.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. If you want to know more about Donna Hicks, go to her website, drdonnahicks.com. That's DRDONNAHICKS.com. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Raj's odious book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. And for updates on the book, this podcast, and a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. Take care.